Be a live commentary where I want to play the game and discuss a few things about the current meta game as well at the same time. So let's see how that goes. The battle is between Boy and Rome. I went for an infantry rush with, let's see here, I have 4 Oath Swords, 6 Sword Followers, 4 Levy Freemen, and 2 Celtic Light Horse, if memory serves. The thing I want to discuss here is why it seems to be, at least in my experience, why it seems to be difficult to use skirmishers to good effect in this patch, and I'm specifically talking about foot skirmishers. One thing is that foot skirmishers need time in order to work effectively, so they need time to use their missiles and get kills on the enemy. Against rush builds, this can be difficult, you can't kite, but in previous patches it was a lot easier to use skirmishers to good effect, and one of the reasons why, I think, is because in previous patches you were often up against elite armies that had very few units and more elite units, while now you see armies like this, armies with quite a lot of good infantry, cavalry, and low tier infantry. It will be, if you have you go for skirmishers and you have a shortage of infantry or cavalry, when your units are engaged, you will have a hard time protecting your skirmishers because your enemy has more units that he can use to flank. And rear charging, flanking, and getting into skirmishers is an easier and quicker way to kill a lot of enemy soldiers than straight up skirmishing, and especially from the front. So, let's see if we're able to. It looks like my opponent brought some skirmishers here. He's also used some deployables, so that's interesting. And he brought a Roman ballista. Now this should be pretty straightforward. He doesn't have a lot of skirmishers, and I'm going to send my horse around to try to deal with his ballista, but I'm spread fairly thin, so I'm not too worried about his ballista here. Going to use the Levy Freeman as well against the cavalry over there. This won't be the best battle to really show what I'm talking about, but the main idea is that against rush armies that are able to close the distance quickly and engage your melee troops, it's going to be extremely difficult to manage to stop enough of the units to buy your skirmishers time to do the damage that they need to do. A good player can do this by delaying the engagement and choosing where and what troops he engages, but it's going to be very difficult for average players and players that aren't very skilled to do this effectively enough to negate the infantry advantage that your opponent has. So that's why I think that horse skirmishers are more viable than ever, mainly because they can deny the ability to engage, and they can tie up cavalry by just being annoying and running around, peppering them with javelins, arrows, stuff like that. And more importantly, they are able to stay out of melee while your melee troops do what they're supposed to. So other people might have other experiences, and certainly with the Eastern factions, keep in mind that I have limited experience with the Eastern factions. I don't play with them a whole lot, play against them quite a lot, but I'm not very skilled in using all skirmish armies, or armies that rely mostly on skirmishers to do their killing. So keep that in mind. I might not be the best advocate for skirmishing armies, but I'd just like to throw it out there that there seems to be an issue with using skirmishers to their full potential in this patch because of how the game is balanced and because of how the army compositions usually look. Now here I'm able to engage my opponent pretty much at will. He doesn't pull back, of course. He has used his deployables here, so not really the best example, but still, it's just by having these 2 cavalry units and tying up the rest of his cavalry, I am going to be able to tie down a significant portion of his forces and get at his. In this case, he has not only skirmishers, but he also has ballista, which is something you don't see very often in quick battles, because they are hard to make work and they're kind of annoying because they lead to camping. But still, it kind of shows. Well, it is a poor example. I'll concede that without any further qualification. It is a pretty poor example of how skirmishers can be protected and so on, but just by having, there's no way that my opponent is going to be able to protect his skirmishers for long enough for them to do an appreciable amount of damage here. It's just going to be almost impossible, and a ballista, not the best choice probably, but still, skirmishers are vulnerable and they can be a major liability in that they limit your cavalry and your infantry. And cavalry and infantry is in this patch, because of the longer engagements and because of how important flanking and rear charging is, the infantry and cavalry advantage is extremely important. Looks like this is going to be over fairly quickly, but if you have other thoughts than me on this, I would love to hear them. If you manage to use foot skirmishers to good effect, if you have any tips or tricks on how to protect them, prolong the engagements and so on, and give them the time they need to do enough damage basically, then I would really love to hear them. So write it in the comments or something like that if you have anything to contribute. Again, not the best example of anything. This was clearly a case of just rushing in and destroying a lot of inferior units. Still, it kind of shows in a way how quickly even infantry rushes can get in and destroy enemy skirmishers. Now this army, very strange Roman army with the 3 Praetorian Guard, but they hardly did anything because the rest of the army just disintegrated around them. Still, if this Roman army was more typical, it would maybe have had, say, 6 evocati cohorts, some auxiliary infantry, some supporting cavalry, and 3 Syrian archers. And while the Oathsworn go and destroy the evocatis, it's going to be difficult to stop these sword followers and the Celtic light horse from moving around the flanks and getting into the skirmishers. And when they do that, they are going to be able to destroy a lot of the enemy army very quickly and open the enemy up for rear charges. So, in my opinion, can be more important having extra infantry and cavalry units to protect yourself from rear charges, flanking, and to prevent your opponent from using his skirmishers effectively. So if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, and I'll see you on the battlefield.